Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate on what is the last day of winter, the first day of spring here in the Northern Hemisphere, live on Tuesday, March 19th. Today's episode is an interesting one, I think, in many ways. And before we jump into it, let me see, the topic is Big Chocolate disappoints again. So let's get into why that is the case. But before we do, to remind everybody, no matter where you are in the world, why don't you go into whatnot? I would appreciate it if you go into either the live chat on YouTube or the comments, whether you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, and let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I'll get that shout out up on the screen. And if you have any questions or have any comments, I will also put them into the live chat or the comments, and I'll get them asked and answered during the course of the hour, or at least I'll attempt to answer them. I will get them asked over the course of the hour. And to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by members of the Chocolate Life. So if you're not a member, I'd appreciate if you go over there, become a member, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. All of those things would be very, very helpful. All right, so let's dive into it. This is the homepage of thechocolatelife.com right now. And for every single one of these episodes, I produce an individual post. And here's the post for today's episode. And before we jump into today's episode, what I want to do is I want to talk about something that came across my news feeds yesterday, because I think it's important, number one, and it is related. So regular listeners of this of these episodes will know that I use Google Alerts. It's one of the things that I use to get information about news that comes across, and I have an alert on the EUDR, the European Deforestation, or the European Union deforestation regulations. And yesterday, so this is this morning's feed, you can see yesterday, this note came across my feed, which is that in confectionery news, there was the notification that EUR is going to delay some of the most controversial elements of the upcoming EUDR. And the one of the controversial elements that specifically they're talking about here is what's called the association of risk. So are you a low risk, a medium risk, or a high risk for deforestation country? And so one of the things, the worry was that everybody in Africa was going to be, by default, considered to be a high-risk country. And what that would do is it would increase the likelihood that shipments would be inspected at a certain level, documentation would be inspected at a certain level. And was that fair or not? And so one of the things that the EU has done is to delay the implementation of the risk system. So everybody's going to start off at the same risk level. And it looks like, I believe it's a medium risk level. So it's important to understand that. You can go through here and you can look. This post is linked to on the Chocolate Life. So if you go to here, you'll see a banner for, actually, it's not. I'm going to have to put the link in. I will make sure that the link to this post is in the chocolate. Oh, here it is. All right, so you have the link to this article, and you can go and read it yourself, and you can get more details. But it's important that elements of the EUDR, which were controversial, are going to be delayed. And another element that is going to be delayed, and this is this follow-on regulation to the EUDR. So if you look at the EUDR, one of the things that it talks about, or the only thing that it is focused on, is deforestation, right? And people have wondered, there are lots of other challenges that need to be addressed. For example, illegal labor and farmers' rights. So why is the UDR only focused on deforestation and not all these other things? So there's this companion legislation called the CSDDD, and aspects of the CSDDD are also going to be phased in. differently from an original schedule. And so if you want to find out a little bit more about that, you can go to this post, which I haven't linked to on the today's post for today's episode, but I will be linking to it afterwards. And what I'm also going to be doing, because I think it's important, I had a conversation about the EUDR, I want to say in late December, early January, with Anthony Fountain, who is the executive director at the Voice Network, and where we specifically talked about what the EUDR does cover and what the CSDDD is designed to follow on and cover. And so I'm going to link to that episode. Again, I'm going to put it on the post today, on the post for today, so that you can go and look at this yourself. Now, one of the things that I am not a fan of when it comes to confectionery news as a source is they actually never link to their primary sources. And so one of the things that I am going to be looking for is I'm going to be looking for the primary sources to this. So there has to be something coming out of the EU. So I'm going to be going and looking at those. There are some links to some sources here, which is unusual. I just noticed for the first time. But in any way, I think it's really, really important to understand. And what is it about the EUDR and the CSDDD that I think is compelling at this point? And I think I wonder to what extent the current run-up in prices, right, has to do with market uncertainty with respect to the way the EUDR is going to be implemented. What was to be a hard stop deadline in December 31, 2024. After that, it would be necessary to be compliant, although there's a grandfathered rule that says any cocoa or any chocolate products that are in the EU on December 31st, 2024 will be exempt. So, which is helped with some of the volatility, I believe. But, there's a huge concern about the price of cocoa. And, here it was on Friday, the closing price of cocoa was $8,200 a ton. And I took a look at the prices for this morning, and the futures price this morning is currently running at $80.68. It's gone down slightly for May. That's important. So this is the May futures price. So it's currently at $80.51. That's today's price here. For the futures price, today's cash price, $82.58. But take a look at the downward trend. So we're looking at a year from now. We're looking at things, settling back down, not to the mid 2000s, which is where it's been for a long time, but we're looking at a very, very significant decrease in the price over the course of the next 18 months. Now, will the price actually move this way? I don't know the answer to that question, because this future price is going to assume a regular harvest for next year. I think that's what the assumption here is on the price drop. If we have another year of bad harvests, then these prices are not going to go in this direction. But this is currently what the futures contracts look like. I mean, the link to this page is here, right, at barcharts.com, the link to this. And so you'll be able to take a look at this yourself, and you can follow the prices yourself. And why is all this important? What I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the EUDR and the CSDDD announcements that came across my feed yesterday because they're important. And I think they're important to influencing one of the influences for the price of cocoa. Now, if we actually look at what has been influencing the price of cocoa over the course of the last year, what we find is that the price has tripled from a year ago, right? And the primary reason for the price tripling is that the harvest has been bad. And this is the third year in a row that harvests have been bad, but this year's harvests have been significantly below expectations. And so Big Chocolate, specifically, right, is really concerned about where the cocoa is going to come from. There's not enough cocoa, right? There's a shortfall in production. There's not enough cocoa to meet the demand, right? So all these big companies that are publicly traded do forecasts, and the forecasts are based upon sales. And if the sales numbers are different, they go down. If the costs rise, then they're not going to beat their numbers. So there is this market equation which has to do with satisfying A, what they've told the market they'll do, and B, what market analysts expect them to do, and how company A, their results compare with company B. And so all of these things affect the stock price of the companies, right? And if you're a private company, right, then you need to have products which are in line, right, priced competitively with public companies, right, if you want to be able to compete in the marketplace. So you're a private company, you don't have the same shareholder pressures that public companies do, but you're still required, if you want to put products into the marketplace, and people will go into the store and say, this one is $2, and last week it was $1, and this one is $5, where last week it was $1. You can't do that. You need to remain price competitive in the marketplace. Why is all this important? Right? Why is all this important? Right? And what has this got to do with big chocolate and big chocolate disappointing again? And why is there this big wrong way sign here? Right? And the answer to that question is we're going to come back down here, back to our regularly scheduled program. You can see that's what it says here, is that on LinkedIn the other day, there was a post from Peak Bridge. Let me close these because you don't need to see these names. This is my account. I'm live here on LinkedIn. I'm logged in. And so there's a post here, right? And there was a comment here by Johnny Drain, right? And what we've got here is what I think is a perfect storm in a negative kind of way. So for quite some time, I have been writing about alternative chocolates, right? So these are products that are designed to mimic chocolate, but are not chocolate. And there are two approaches to producing these alternative chocolates. One of them is using precision fermentation, and it's going to take a base grain, often barley, and it will take a flavoring, often carob. And this is painting the entire category with a fairly broad brush, but you can think about this the way. Or what you can do is you can use cell culturing. So you'll take a cell from a cacao seed, and in the lab, you'll just grow lots of them, right? And you can use that to make a chocolate-like product, right? And so one of the questions is, where does the fat component come from when you're doing that? But these are all produced in vats in labs, right? They are not produced from cacao seeds grown on a farm, right? And I have expressed a fascination with the technology over the course of several years. I think it's fascinating that the technology gets there. I've tasted several of the products, and I don't think that they are high quality products in the sense of specialty chocolate, which is what people know me for talking about. But if I'm a member of Big Chocolate, and I am producing candy bars for retail sale, and the center is primarily like a whipped nougat with caramel and nuts, and there's a thin layer of chocolate around the outside of it. Then replacing that thin layer of chocolate around the outside of it with one of these alt chocolates, is something that can be done, right? And many people might not detect the difference or care. They'll look at the price and go, oh, this is the bar that I'm used to getting, and it's a price that I'm willing to pay for it. But in my experience tasting the products that have come to me, and I did rate several of these products from a company in the UK called WNWN. So they sent me some bars, and I did a live tasting online to do them, right? And so, I think it's a fascinating technology. I think it's interesting, right? And I think that there are some applications for it, right? But what I'm worried about, right, What I'm worried about is that if the high price of cocoa remains, so if cocoa remains in the $8,000 a metric ton price range, right? And in speaking with Johnny Drain, he says that they can produce, who's founder of WNWN, he said they can produce their chocolate adjacent product at a price that is competitive with chocolate that is made from cocoa beans. Then what will happen if and when Big Chocolate decides to increasingly abandon chocolate made from cocoa beans, real chocolate? What happens, right? And increasingly, I think what triggered me was was having a conversation with somebody, or what triggered me, what made me sensitive to this post, right, about alternative chocolates and the high price of cocoa, right, was a conversation that I had with somebody who mentioned that big companies, they knew from experience that big companies are not only expressing interest in buying the product. So we see that Mondelez and others are buying the product and working with it, but these companies are investing in these manufacturers. So you have a big chocolate company who's investing in alternative chocolate products. And from a business perspective, it makes sense, right? But what's the problem there? Right? What's the problem there? Part of it is around messaging. I mean, this is an image that I took from a post associated with WNWN, and this phrase "chocolate is effed." I mean, I don't think it's helpful, right, to say that chocolate is effed. It's not helpful to anybody. You got this interesting array of people who are smiling. I don't know if all of them are cocoa farmers. I don't know if any of them is scientists. Some of them are laughing, some of them are not. They seem to be happy about the fact that chocolate is effed, or what is it? Again, I'm not entirely certain why it's all women. Why aren't men laughing at this? They're doing. I'm just really, really, really not certain about what's going in, other than I don't think that it is helpful. Now, if you want to know more about WNWN Food Labs, you can click on this link. It'll take you to their page, right? And it says the future of chocolate is delicious, ethical, and sustainable. It's not the future of chocolate. It's the future of something that is chocolate adjacent. Whatever it is that WNWN is making, it is not chocolate. However, another disturbing thing that I heard, which is that along with Big Chocolate going in and investing in many of these companies, what they're doing is they're going to regulatory agencies like the FDA here in the United States and saying, please, FDA, would you change the standards of identity for us? We're going to petition you to change the legal definition, right, of what chocolate is so that we can include these alt chocolates. And if you won't, can we at least have temporary marketing permits so that we can take our stuff, which is sort of like chocolate, and label it as chocolate? So number one, right, Johnny, no. What you were talking about is not the future of chocolate. This is the future of something that is attempting to replace chocolate. And at the moment, at least, right, doesn't do a very good job in replicating the taste. If you're looking at cheap candy, right, that you're finding on the shelf of a drugstore, maybe, right? But if you're looking at chocolate, you have a long way to go at what's going on. And so, man, what is one of the issues? Well, if you take a look at what WNWN is talking about, they're saying that part of their process is to use carob, right, as part of their flavoring in the recipes. Now, one of the challenges, so they're using barley, I think is what they're saying is the major source of the input. So I don't think it's gluten-free if it's got barley in it, right? But they're using carob. So what's the issue with that? Well, the total, average. So this is the average harvest on this, and you can click on this link and you can see this table, right? So I'm not going to go and I'm not going to go read through it. But if you look at from 2013 to 2019, the average production of carob right, in the world was about 180,000 metric tons, right? And the average production of cocoa prior to this year's bad harvest was somewhere between 4 and 5 million metric tons, right? And so, how do we get from 180,000 metric tons of carob, even if you're only using a small amount of it as a flavoring in chocolate, in quote unquote, something which is chocolate adjacent, right? How do we get 180,000 metric tons of cocoa of carob to be a replacement flavoring for, 4 million metric tons of chocolate, right? Really, I don't think you can. I don't think you can in any sense. What this will do is it will drive up demand. Driving up demand will drive up price. And so while it's cheaper now, will it remain the same sort of price competitiveness if demand goes up? I don't know the answer to that question, right? But notice the countries that are on this list. These are the top producers of carob in the world: Spain, Portugal, Italy, Morocco, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, Lebanon, and Algeria. Well, most of them are in the EU, right? And okay, so from an import perspective, it solves a whole bunch of problems, right, associated with EUDR. There's nothing in here. None of these companies need to be EUDR compliant, right, in the sense that somebody from Africa does, for example, right? But none of these countries is in Africa, right? And so let's say that these companies, so WNWN Food Labs is one of those companies. There's another company that I have covered and written about. It's now called Planet A Foods. It used to be called COA, QOA. Right? I have done a review of the COA product, COA in the past, but you can click on this and you can read my review of a sampler kit that I got. There's a company here in the United States called Voyage Foods. And if you go, cocoa-free chocolate, it's not cocoa-free chocolate, it's cocoa-free something that is pretending to be chocolate. And so for me, this is not the way to talk about it, right? It's not cocoa-free chocolate. And you go and take a look and, if you think about, what are they talking about? All of these products are free from all of the bad things that are associated with cacao. That's their primary thing. It has got a lower carbon footprint. There's no illegal labor issues, right? Right. So they're talking about free from, right? Free from flavor, right, is an issue that I would take with it. But here's Voyage Foods. They've got this cocoa-free chocolate, and what are the ingredients? Vegetable oil blend. So RSPO is responsible, sustainable palm oil. So they're using oil, palm oil, shea kernel oil, sugar, grape seeds, sunflower protein flour, natural flavors, sunflower lecithin, and salt. Right? So there's nothing in here which is anything related to chocolate. And if these companies are petitioning the FDA to allow them to call this chocolate, this is something that I think that we need to go and petition the FDA and say, no, you can't allow this. This is not chocolate, right? Right. So if you want to, you can go and here's a link to California Cultured. I think it's an interesting approach, right? Experts from farm to table. What they're doing is they're taking cells from plant products and growing them in a lab. So from the farm to the table via a vat, where I'm not entirely sure about what's going on. And I did write an article about California Cultured. This is back in 2021, in September, where I think it is an interesting technology. I have my doubts about it even then. I have my doubts about it even then. But what I want to do, right, is point out something that's really, really important here, right, that I think that is being lost by most people in the narrative. But before I do, what I want to do is give a quick shout out to Mark at Blue Spruce Chocolates in Kittredge, Colorado, who says redefining the term chocolate by the FDA would be a killer for the craft chocolate industry. Hadn't heard about the lobbying efforts. If you have any links to publicized reports, please let us know. Absolutely. I mean, So I do have to say that this was a conversation that I had with an industry colleague who is in a position to hear things, right? Related to this, related to investment, and related to things like how do we get these alternative chocolate products into the marketplace, and we can still use the word chocolate anywhere on the label to describe what they are. Now, in a marketing material, it's hard to know. On the label, it's a different kind of thing, right? And so we need to be very, very careful. People are used to compound easy melts, right? So they're they're used to chocolate adjacent products. There's a lot of chocolate like stuff out there, right? Right, there are a lot of products made with things that purport to be chocolate that aren't things that are chocolate flavored, right? So the market is there in some respects, right? And it's also kind of when we think about the controversy around milk, right? So the dairy industry wants to reserve the use of the word milk for just animal milks. So I can have dairy milk, right? Cow's milk and sheep's milk and goat's milk. Those are all milk, right? But you can't call almond milk, right? And yeah, this is a really interesting thing because the definition of bread is wheat flour. And so if I go into a store and I see the word bread, just the word bread, the expectation, actually, I believe the legal definition says it must be made from wheat, right? But we have lots of modifiers for the word bread. So I've got whole wheat bread, right? Rye bread, cornbread, pumpernickel, I mean, all kinds of modifiers of the word bread. And we as consumers know that if I see a label that says rye bread, I'm expecting something which is not wheat bread, right? And I wonder why that doesn't work with milk, right? So why can't I say it's almond milk? People know that milk, right, usually comes from cows. Goat's milk come from goat. Sheep's milk come from sheep. We already know that this works, right? Why can't we say that almond milk is made from almonds? I mean, consumers, at least in some respects, right, understand those kinds of distinctions, right? So part of the logic may be maybe we can talk about chocolate the same way, right? I don't know the answer to that question. And the one of the people that I was talking to about this particular issue also said, Clay, I understand what it is you're talking about, right? But if the FDA were to change the regulations to allow like almond milk to be a modifier for milk, because people understand that rye bread is a modifier for bread, using that same logic. What he says is that I don't necessarily trust big companies to respect the rules and regulations. They play loose with regulations, and we already know that they do. And so, yeah, do we want to let the dairy industry regulate the use of the word milk very narrowly? And colloquially, we use the term much more broadly, just because we're afraid that big companies are going to take advantage of a change in regulations. I get it. I understand it. Right. And you're right, Mark. If we were to go take a look again at the ingredients for the Voyage food, it is a hyper processed product, right? So the palm oil is processed. Let's go back to the Voyage Foods link. So let's go take a look again at what the ingredients are. The ingredients are vegetable oil blend, so a palm oil and a shea oil. So the palm oil, it's going to be probably a fractionated palm oil, because you need the fraction of the palm oil that is solid at room temperature, right? Shea butter does have a tendency to be solid at room temperature, and so the mix is going to be there to give you a melting point, which is going to be close mimic to the melting profile of cocoa butter. But yeah, both very highly processed products. Cane sugar, if it's a white sugar, is a highly processed product. Grapeseed flour, I don't know, sunflower protein flour. So we're using the ground up grape seeds, right, which is probably something which is left over from winemaking, maybe. I'm not certain where the grape seeds are coming from. Right? Sunflower protein flour. So these provide the non-fat solids in the mix. Right? So, we've got to provide something which is not just going to be it's not going to be a white chocolate where you only have fat, right? And milk proteins, right? So we need to provide something that's going to provide the equivalent of the cocoa powder, the non-fat solids, right? So that's where that's coming from. But you're right, the sunflower protein flour. So because it's a protein flour, it's an extract of sunflower flour. So it's a hyper processed product. And if I put this into something else, maybe I've got, chemically bleached white flour. It's a hyper processed product made from hyper processed products. So not good for you. And it would be interesting to know a lot of iron, right? In a 100, so number one, a serving size of 100 grams, 500 calories. I would say that serving size is a little large. 100 grams, that's a lot, right? 500 calories, that's 25% of, calorie intake for somebody. At that, yeah, if you've got, if you are if you are if you're iron deficient, it could be okay. 47 grams of carbs. All right. So, but 11 grams of dietary fibers. So, from a keto perspective, that's 36 grams of total sugars, of which 35 are added sugars. So, from that aspect, not a healthy product by any stretch of the imagination. And is it less healthy than real cocoa chocolate? Probably. Probably, especially a relatively minimally processed specialty chocolate or craft chocolate. That's good. Right. But let's jump back to what I think is the real issue here that we want to talk about, right? Which is more than 20 years ago, the chocolate industry, right, was presented with an inconvenient truth, to borrow from Al Gore, right? Which is there was a lot of illegal labor in their supply chain. And the big chocolate, which includes big cocoa in this context, said, you know what, right? Please, 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 rather than legislating an answer, legislating a solution. So please, the United States Congress, do not pass laws that are going to force us to solve the problem. Let us figure out solutions on our own. And so many members of Big Chocolate signed what is called the Harkin-Engel Protocol, right? And the idea of Harkin-Engel was within 5 years that Big Chocolate was going to voluntarily undertake all of the actions necessary to eliminate illegal labor, and especially forced labor, slavery, trafficking, in the cocoa supply chain around the world, but especially in West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana, where the biggest problems were identified to have existed. 20 years later, more than 20 years later, right? And the problem has only gotten worse, right? So none of the goals of Harkin-Engel have actually been achieved, right? There have been milestones, but these milestones are continuing to be pushed down the road. Well, no, we're not going to do it by 5 years from now. We'll do it 5 years, not 5 years from the signing of Harkin-Engel. We'll do it. Please give us another 5 years. And then please give us another 5 years. And then, please give us another 5 years to solve the problem. And what we find is that the reports of the amounts of illegal labor have gone up, right? And while it's really, really difficult to put numbers on the amount of enslaved people, estimates are there are as many as 30,000 just in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And we can arguably say that one is too many, right? And 30,000, but 30,000 is not anywhere near zero, right? And so Big Chocolate and cocoa have failed to live up to their voluntarily accepted obligations under Harkin-Engel, right? And what we find out is that organizations like international rights advocates, right, have gone to court, right, and said, hey, you guys are making a lot of money, right, and you're not addressing the problems, right? So international rights advocates had a suit that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, right, to argue that there was a bit of law called the Alien Tort Statute, which allowed entities in the United States to have standing to sue companies for actions which happened in a foreign country. Alien tort, right? And while prior to this point, I had a lot of respect for Neil Katyal as a lawyer, he was arguing for Big Chocolate, and I think it's like a big, it's a procedural win. Big Chocolate has done everything it can, right, for the last 20 odd years, right, to make sure that none of the claims against them actually go to trial, right, because they are terrified, right, of the economic consequences if what they are required to do is to compensate um, a very, very large class of people. There's a million farming families, more than a million farming families, just in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. What does that mean in terms of the economic consequences to Big Chocolate? Their entire business model has been about pushing risks off their balance sheet, right? Externalizing those risks, externalizing those costs, making other people pay for them. Why are anybody's tax dollars going to pay an NGO to fix a problem that was created by a member of Big Chocolate or Big Cocoa? Why? Right? I don't get it. Why aren't we holding the big companies who are responsible for the situation that we're in, right, accountable and make them pay for it, right? Simple as that. Now, Big Chocolate should have been able to anticipate, right, because El Nino is a known weather phenomenon, and we see the effects of El Nino in changing weather patterns and their effect on harvests. We've seen that for decades, right? And there we know, right, that deforestation changes climate locally, right? And so we see that harvests are reduced. We need to change where crops are planted in order to be able to take advantage of what rain there is. I mean, these are things that Big Chocolate is known about for quite some time, right? They're also aware, right? Also aware, painfully aware, right, that the amount of money that they pay for cocoa, right, does not end up, most of the money does not end up in the pockets of farmers, right? And that a large percentage of farmers are living in what people in consuming countries would call below the poverty line, right? Right. This whole thing that is called living wage and living income, making sure that farmers are paid an amount which, compensates them fairly for the labor that they put into producing cocoa. I mean, this is something that Big Chocolate and Big Cocoa are painfully aware of. And what is true about the increase in cost of cocoa, so the tripling of price, right, in less than a year of cocoa, the sad fact is that most of that price increase, right, does not inure to the benefit of farmers. Now, if I'm in a very tightly controlled cocoa economy, like the one in Ghana, COCOBA determines what the farmers get paid, right? And they would have to go and sit down and decide, oh, this is what the price is for cocoa, and so this is how much we're going to pay for the farmers for the work. I try to stay on top of those things. I haven't seen any noise that the farm gate price of cocoa has gone up at all in the last little while. Right. So in Ghana, at least, the farmers are not benefiting from this increase in price. Um, if you're not in as controlled an economy, or you're buying outside the market. So, for example, if you're a specialty chocolate maker and you're buying small amounts of beans on the specialty market, the farmers can charge what the farmers want to charge, right? And there's enough demand in the specialty market, so the farmers are going to get. So it may be that some small farmers who were charging $4,000 a ton a year ago are charging 8,000 a ton now, and they're making that 8,000 a ton, right? Because if you want to make chocolate, this is what the market price is for cocoa. You're going to pay for it. And if you're a small producer like Blue Spruce is, I saw some posts on Well Tempered on Facebook this morning, which talked about those same sort of issues. This is the consumer expecting the small maker to double or triple the price of their bars, right? It's a real challenge, and it's a big challenge for Big Chocolate, because when you have automated your processes, right, to the point where you can't reduce the manufacturing cost much more, right? So you've gotten rid of as many people as you possibly can on the line. The lines are as automated as they can possibly be. You pour stuff in the beginning, and you've mainly got people who are watching screens to make sure stuff happens and it comes out the other end. I mean, when you've automated and wrung out all the costs in production, then the cost of ingredients. How do you deal with huge changes in the cost of ingredients? And the answer is you can't. Now, for a smaller chocolate maker, it may be that the cost of labor, right, is huge, but you'd have to figure out ways to reduce the cost of labor in order to be able to absorb an increase in the cost of ingredients. And that can be very, very hard if you're working on a craft scale. It's a no-win situation for anybody, right? But how does all of this connect to alt.chocolate? So why am I sitting here going through this 40-minute intro, which is, if Big Chocolate is allowed to invest in and bring to market products which do not use cocoa, right? Because it's easier for them, it's more convenient for them, it is profitable for them to do so, then what happens to the farmers? What happens to cocoa farmers? Right? Are companies like WNWN, who say our product is free from everything bad that is associated with labor on cocoa farms in West Africa, right? Are they giving manufacturers and consumers an off-ramp, right? To say, hey, cocoa farmers in West Africa, we have taken unfair advantage of you for the last 50 years. And thank you, but bye-bye, because we have this other thing now, which we're going to do, and we don't need you anymore, right? What happens to the 1.5? Well, it's certainly not going to affect all 0.15 million or so farming families in Ivory Coast and Ghana. And if the average size of family is 6 people, so we're looking at 8, 9, 10 million people, something like that. What happens to the lives and livelihoods of those people if what Big Chocolate decides to do is going to say, you know what, right? We're just going to stop buying cocoa, right? We're going to stop buying cocoa because we have this cocoa alternative, right? And it's in the EU, and it's a whole lot easier to deal with. And we can make it in a vat in a lab, and we already know how to scale up manufacturing because that's what we do in our chocolate factories. Right? So we already know how to do that. We already know how to do that. We know what the processes are. We know how to account for it. All of the things are in the row, and so we don't need cocoa farmers anymore. So what happens to cocoa farmers? And this is the question I want you all to think about as we are discussing alternative chocolate, right? So there are a couple of things that we can think about when we think about alternative chocolates, right? So one of which is, do they taste any good, right? Right. So of the 4 companies that I've mentioned here, So WNWN, COA, currently Planet A, Voyage Foods, and California Cultured. I've only tasted 2 of them, right? So I can't talk about all of them. And COA, a couple of years ago, I did WNWN the end of 2023, right? And so nothing of what it is that I've tasted has given me any confidence as a chocolate lover that what they're creating is an acceptable alternative to chocolate. Now, however, if I am a fan of M&Ms or you know, or candy bars, again, so whipped nougat with caramel and nuts with a little coating of something which is chocolate and which may be compounds now, right? Are what it is that these companies are doing acceptable, right? And to that consumer. And the answer is yes. And that's like 90% of the market, right? But I have to believe, right, that well, I have no reason to believe otherwise given the history of big chocolate. I have no confidence in them doing anything which is going to inure to the benefit of anyone but their shareholders in the long run. Right? So I've got a product which doesn't taste like real chocolate. Maybe it performs like chocolate, but it doesn't taste like real chocolate. Right? I'm certainly not going to there's nothing about, oh, am I going to worry about now differences? Is Portuguese carob, does it taste different from Spanish carob or Lebanese or Turkish carob? Maybe, I don't know, right? But we certainly don't, I don't think we have the diversity of flavor profiles which are associated with cocoa and its spread around the world. Right? So number one, it doesn't taste like chocolate. Number two is it is only a hyper-processed food, right? Right. All of these chocolate adjacent products are made in vats in one way or another. They are hyper-processed foods, right? If I'm lucky, what I might do is maybe I can use cocoa butter with some of the non-fat solid substrates which go with it. Maybe I can use cocoa butter, but I don't think so. Certainly WNWN is not using cocoa butter because it's cocoa free, and Voyage Foods is not using cocoa butter. Right? California Cultured is, I remember from my talking with them that it is possible to culture. They can't culture the lipids, but you can ferment the fats. Right? So I don't know where they're getting the fats. I haven't seen the recipe from it, but I'm not prepared to believe that they're using any cocoa products because they're talking about avoiding all cocoa products. Right? It's cocoa free. We avoid everything which is bad with cocoa. It's deforestation free. It is lower carbon footprint. It is, no illegal labor. But we can't let these companies get away with that marketing without saying, oh yeah, and we're going to totally F over the farmers. And so I go take a look at this particular image, right, which is, again, I found on a LinkedIn post associated with WNWN. I'm taking a look at this, and it's not that chocolate is effed, it's cocoa farmers are effed. I want, anytime I put together a spreadsheet in which I am talking about what is the cost of producing cocoa, what I need to remember that in every cell of that spreadsheet, farmers' lives are represented. And you cannot walk away from the fact that farmers' lives are represented. As an industry, right, this is the problem. As an industry, right, big chocolate, right, has failed to live up to its voluntary commitments under Hark and Engel for more than 20 years, right? They have spent more than 2 decades in court, right, trying to make sure that they are not held accountable, right, for knowingly perpetuating illegal labor in their supply chains. And while we can play with numbers to say we're addressing the problem, the fact is, right, the number, as demand for cocoa has gone up, as the number of farmers who are involved in cocoa has gone up, the problems have only gone up. Right? We can't let Big Chocolate abdicate its responsibility for the history it has with respect to illegal labor, deforestation, right? Right. And all of the negatives that are associated with farming cocoa by saying, you know what, we're just going to start using this stuff, right, that is alternative to chocolates. And that's the point of today, right? So, and it talks very, very much, I think, to the whole idea of what, the title of this series is, Pod Save Chocolate, right? I don't know that the industry is in an existential crisis right now. I suspect that it is. I suspect that chocolate is in an existential crisis, if at least on the broad consumer level. Right? I have said in the past that I believe that one way in which alt chocolate will make its way into the market is if cocoa becomes so expensive that big chocolate can't use it. I believe I've been saying that for since 2021. That and will big chocolate use the rise in the price of cocoa, right, to constant dollar high, so $8,000 a ton, right, compared with 2,800 less than a year ago, is a huge price increase. And where does that go, and why, right? Well, it is as a result, in part, of the big chocolate externalizing all of it, as many risks as possible, right, and the costs associated with its practices, right, off its balance sheet. That, yes, we're going to create social conditions which mean that it makes a whole lot of sense for a farmer to move from where they are as the trees get older, and become less productive, to move into new lands where the soil is more fertile, and we're going to have to take down forest in order to grow cocoa, right? Or what we're going to do is, there are lots of complicating factors of this, and maybe I'm reducing it, right, to an equation which is far too simple. Maybe, right? But I think that if the price of cocoa, right, remember, the price of cocoa is, I can go here and take a look at this chart, right? And, if we look at May, what I'm doing is these prices will update, right, on a regular basis, right? So I'm looking at this 80.27. It's already down, 200 and something bucks a metric ton for the May futures contract. I can see it go down, but, right, if, right, there's another short harvest next year, we're not going to see these prices change from where they are now. The futures prices are going to go. If there is continued pressure due to climate change, right, local weather patterns, year-to-year weather patterns, which are independent of climate change. So we have a move in one direction, but they tend to increase the volatility of the weather. If we've had 3 years in a row of bad harvest, this one has been the worst, right? And if the prices stay this high, right, there is going to be increasing pressure on big chocolate, right, by their investors, right, to go and figure out a way, right, to stay in business. And what they're going to do is they're going to abandon cocoa farmers, and they're going to go with lab-grown alternatives. And they are going to do everything they possibly can, right, to enable them to market these products, right, in ways to consumers, in ways that put the best light on them. And what I'm suggesting that we, as people who love chocolate, right, let big chocolate know that, this is not kosher, right, right, right. There's this concept in law called ripeness, right, which is part of standing. Well, if the if the harm is no longer happening now, right, can I be held accountable for it, right? And if the issue is not ripe, then you don't have standing and it can be tossed. Well, if I'm no longer buying cocoa, right, can I be held responsible for illegal labor? I don't know the answer to that question. Could I conceive of a big chocolate company making that argument? The answer is just to muddy the waters. And if the answer is absolutely yes, right? Right. So what we want to do is we want to make sure, I think, right? We want to make sure that this inching towards alternative chocolate, right? And the language that companies like Voyage Foods and WNWN and Planet A and California Culture use when it comes to cocoa and chocolate, that the language they use is not capable of being used as an off-ramp, which enables big chocolate to abdicate its responsibilities to cocoa farmers, right? To the fifth, since Harkin Engel, at least the last 20 years or more, of self-acknowledged, right, responsibility for dealing with inequities in the cocoa supply chain, right? We can't, right? We can't let big chocolate wiggle out from underneath these responsibilities. And we can't let alternative to chocolate, right, provide them with this off-ramp and with the language that they're using. I think it is despicable. Right? I think it's immoral that they're doing this, right? I don't know that they're doing it on purpose necessarily. This is not their intent, right? But they're giving big chocolate an off-ramp to be able to go and do that. Again, I'm fascinated by the technology. I think it's interesting. I think it will get better. I think that the products may improve in taste over time. Not entirely sure. I don't think that makes up for the fact that they are in fact hyper-processed foods. Give me a simple 3-ingredient chocolate, cocoa bean sugar and cocoa butter. Give me that, and I'm going to be a happy camper with it. I'm not really interested in something which is made from palm oil, shea oil, grape seeds, and sunflower protein. That's not chocolate, and it never will be, right? And it's not cocoa-free chocolate. It's cocoa-free pretender. I don't know. Anyway, before we close, a quick shout out. Elmer Pineda from Honduras. We as farmers not seeing this 8K metric per ton. Absolutely. We're still losing if we sell at what the middleman pays. Absolutely. Again, Elmer, you're talking about Honduras, right? Specifically here in your situation particularly. I do know that there are some places where, and from what I've heard, Nigeria is one of them, where farmers are producing less and making more because they are getting higher prices. There is some ability to negotiate there, right? Because if you do not sell to this middleman, some other middleman will come by and will pay a higher price. So some people are making more, but that 8,000 metric ton, that's not what the farm gate price is, right? They're not making it, right? So I would agree with you there. Some farmers are seeing more, but very few farmers, if any, are seeing the entire market price, right? There is some increment, but it's still not worth it for the farmer. And again, what that increment is depends on the country, but absolutely. So in general, who's making out? Not the farmer. This increase in price, it's not the farmer, it's the middleman, right? And it's not the chocolate maker in the end. They're paying a lot more, right? The person who buys the cocoa and sells it to the chocolate man, they're the ones who are making the money here, right? And they are part of big chocolate, and they are complicit in the whole mess. We cannot let alt chocolate be an off-ramp. We cannot let the marketing that this is free of all of the ills that plague cocoa be an off-ramp for big chocolate to, and I'm including big cocoa, to abdicate the responsibilities that they have historically, right, acknowledged through Harkin Engel, through the ICI, through all of the mechanisms that have been put in place to address, right, labor inequity in the supply chain, especially in West Africa. We cannot allow big chocolate to abdicate their responsibilities, continued responsibilities. They just can't say, bye-bye, thank you very much, we're going to go do something else now, right? Good luck. No, right? I think if that were be allowed to happen, I think I would have to get out of chocolate. I don't think that I could be part of an industry that allowed that to happen. I have to think about that. Just occurred to me. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry to end up on such a sour note today. But before I go, what I do want to do is mention that this episode of PodSafe Chocolate is sponsored by all of the members of thechocolatelife.com. If you're not a member, please go to the Chocolate Life. There's this green button here. I'm logged in, so it says account. But if you go and you're not logged in, you're not a member, it will say join. Click on the join. There's always a free membership. If you do have a couple of bucks to spend, I appreciate your support. I don't do Patreon, not running any ads, don't do anything else right, other than the memberships, which keep the website up and running. Right? And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe to the channel, share with friends and colleagues, and most importantly, let me know what you think. Am I totally off base here? Right? Do you agree with me? Right? This is something that we need to be, watchful of, to make sure that the regulations don't change, to make sure that Big Chocolate is held accountable, right, and are not allowed to abdicate their responsibilities to cocoa farmers that they have taken on. Would like to know in the comments, right? YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or on thechocolatelife.com. And even though it was a really, really heavy topic today, right, I do think it's important for everyone to remember that chocolate makes people happy, right? When you're working with chocolate and you're not remembering that chocolate makes people happy, right? Right? Even though it's not equally happy to everyone everywhere. Chocolate makes, and for the most part, I think that many cocoa farmers are in fact very happy much of the time. We do need to remember that it's important to have fun when you're working with chocolate, right? That it can be serious at times, right? But it makes people happy, and we need to remind everybody to have fun. But until the next time, everybody, ciao, and look forward to your being here at future episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate.